Hello everyone! Let's dive back into the YouTube algorithm so you know what it's looking for when you're trying to rank your video. We left off our last video talking about how the YouTube algorithm will take your video and pull it out of the video corpus, which is the database of all YouTube videos, and it'll sort that down to just a few hundred candidate videos. If you missed that part, be sure to check it out here. And it's going to be kind of helpful to understand the rest of this because this is the second half of a two-part process. Be sure to stick around to the very end if you're really curious, because it's going to be just a concise overview of what's really important to the algorithm. So let's talk about ranking for a minute. The main role of ranking is to determine if the candidate, it determines the candidate predictions from impressions. Impressions, if you're not familiar with the term, is when your thumbnail appears on the homepage of YouTube or in the suggestion bar on the side. Anytime the user sees your thumbnail in one of those two places, that's considered an impression. This does not include external links to your video, like if you post it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, any of that. That doesn't count as an impression. It also does not count for subscriber notifications. So if your subscriber comes to your video through the notification box, that does not count as an impression. This is important data to the algorithm though, because a candidate could have a very high probability of getting amazing watch time, but one wrong thumbnail and there's no click. It doesn't get watched. So that leads YouTube to categorize impressions as a positive impression, which is when the user sees your thumbnail and clicks it, and a negative impression, which is when they see your thumbnail and they just keep on scrolling. Now, if your video scores higher on negative impressions than positive impressions, it has an interesting effect on that video. The video's positive impressions are actually labeled as mispredicted data, so the watch time doesn't really count as much as if you had lots of positive impressions. But despite all of this, always remember that watch time is, regardless, weighted higher than the impressions. So even if your subscriber comes through the notification and watches your whole video, that still has more relevance because watch time overall has more relevance than impressions. And this is because of clickbait. YouTube actually used to favor impressions more than anything else. If any of you have been on here long enough, I was a viewer, I remember very clearly, when just everything was boobs. And that caused a lot of problems and prompted the switch, which I personally think is a really good idea, because I do agree that watch time is probably the best metric YouTube can use to determine if a video is worth watching or not, because you can't know if it's worth watching or not until after the video is clicked. So where we're at right now is watch time is top priority, and then audience retention, and then impressions. As the algorithm works more towards actually ranking your video, it starts to analyze the video's features. There are more features than we could ever get into in one video, but let me do a quick rundown of just a few of them. The obvious ones are like your tags and your title. The less known ones are the search history of the user, the video topics the user watches, when the last video of that topic was watched by the user, the amount of time watched by the user, where the user watched the video, and what device the user watched the video on. These are just the tiniest fractions of what's being analyzed under the hood for YouTube's algorithm. But as we said in the last video, notice how the user has way more influence on your video than you do. It's kind of an odd way to think about it, but it's honestly the truth of the matter. As mad as you want to get ranked, you have to put it in the hands of your audience. That's all you can do. So real quick, let's look at a little bit more math before we finish up. So we're going to start with how watch time and impressions relate to each other in the weighting. Positive impressions are weighted by the observed watch time in the video. You can see as this formula that I've put up, where N is the number of training examples, which could be positive or negative impressions. That's used to train the AI. And then we have K, which is the number of positive impressions. So you take the total number of impressions subtract the positive impressions from that. From that, you then divide t to the I, which is the watch time of the ith impression. So basically the watch time of a specific video is divided by the total number of impressions minus the positive impressions. And that's a decent bit there of part of the process for YouTube to rank your video. We then move, if it passes a certain number threshold on that formula, we move to this formula, which is basically the learned odds of the video, where P is the click probability and ET is the expected watch time of the impression. So the expected watch time ends up being 1 plus the probability of it being clicked. This brings back an important fact that I mentioned earlier about the fact that if there's more negative impressions than positive ones, the positive ones are labeled as mislabeled predictions. So that means that they're weighted less. Remember that. But as you can see, between both of these videos, there are certain things I've repeated over and over and over again. And while this video and the last video are two different videos on two different algorithms doing two different sets of math, they sound very similar on the surface. I do understand that. But that's because of what all this boils down to. It boils down to watch time, audience retention, and impressions. As far as you and your channel go, that's what you need to worry about. Because while there are some other factors like metadata, obviously, tags are important, your title's important. All these things do matter. But in the end, there are way more features that are in the audience's hands than they are yours. So what you need to do is you need to make thumbnails that get people to positively impression, click on your video, and then you need them to watch the entire video to get audience retention, and then that video, the longer it is, the more increases your watch time. So there's a balance you have to find there of making the video short enough that you get the audience retention, but long enough to maximize the watch time that you achieve from that. And then if you can combine those three things and utilize them properly, you can sprinkle a little bit of sugar with the tags and the title, and then go the extra mile with promotions, and then it starts to take care of itself from there. But thank you for watching. I hope this has helped you out at least a little bit, or you enjoyed the video, or just like hearing about really weird technical stuff. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell if you want to stay up to date for the next time I decide to dissect some kind of social media algorithm, which will be coming. I have some ideas in the works. But as always, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks again.